Evelyn Carter learned early in her marriage that silence could be louder than arguments. The apartment she shared with Daniel was modern and orderly, yet it felt unfinished, like a house staged for sale rather than a home built for living. Every morning she woke before him, careful not to disturb his sleep, and every night she lay beside him listening to the steady rhythm of a man who seemed miles away despite the inches between them. When they married, Daniel had promised patience and partnership. He spoke about building a future slowly, responsibly, the way serious people did. Evelyn believed him because she wanted to. She believed him because love, to her, was not loud or demanding but steady and kind. During their first year, she told herself adjustment took time. During the second, she convinced herself work stress explained everything. By the third, she had stopped asking questions altogether. 4 years passed like that, marked by anniversaries celebrated with polite dinners, birthdays acknowledged with practical gifts, and conversations that never strayed beyond schedules and obligations. Daniel was never cruel. That made everything harder. He was distant, preoccupied, and increasingly impatient with emotions he did not want to examine. Whenever Evelyn tried to talk about what was missing, he brushed it aside with a calm that felt rehearsed. "Let's not make a big deal out of things," he would say, his eyes already drifting back to his phone or laptop. "We're fine." Evelyn nodded each time, swallowing words that grew heavier with every agreement. She told herself that love meant endurance, that a good wife waited rather than demanded. Still, the unspoken truth weighed on her. Their marriage existed on paper and in public smiles, but in private, it was defined by absence. Friends asked when they would start a family, when life would truly begin. Evelyn laughed politely, letting Daniel answer with vague plans about the future to Daniel's mother, Margaret, visited often enough to notice what Evelyn tried to hide. She never asked direct questions, but her comments lingered like accusations. She praised Daniel's dedication to work and gently suggested that harmony at home depended on a wife's attentiveness. Evelyn absorbed every remark as proof that she was failing at something she did not fully understand. At tea night, Evelyn sometimes stood by the bedroom window, watching the city lights flicker below. She wondered how a marriage could feel so lonely without ever being openly unkind. She wondered if love could quietly disappear without anyone noticing. When she brought up counseling once, Daniel laughed softly, as if she had proposed something dramatic and unnecessary. "You think too much," he told her. "Not everything needs fixing." What Daniel did not see was how carefully Evelyn had learned to erase herself. She dressed in neutral colors, spoke softly, and avoided conflict at all costs. She measured her worth by how little trouble she caused. Yet the more she tried to preserve the peace, the more invisible she became. Outside the home, Daniel thrived. His career advanced quickly, and he carried himself with growing confidence among colleagues. He came home later, often distracted, his mind still caught in conversations Evelyn had not been part of. When she asked about his day, his answers grew shorter. Eventually, he stopped noticing when she asked at all. The contrast between who Daniel was at work and who he became at home unsettled Evelyn. She caught glimpses of warmth in his laughter during phone calls, energy in the way he spoke about projects, and people whose names she barely recognized. That version of him never crossed their doorstep. Evelyn blamed herself for the distance, telling herself that if she were more interesting, more confident, more everything, Daniel would return to her. She read articles, listened to advice, and tried to change without ever understanding what was wrong. Each effort was met with polite indifference, as if she were solving a problem Daniel refused to acknowledge existed. The fourth anniversary arrived quietly. Evelyn prepared dinner, setting the table with the same care she once reserved for holidays. Daniel arrived late, apologizing distractedly as he checked a message before sitting down. He offered her a brief smile, thanked her for the meal, and spoke about an upcoming business trip. There was no mention of the date, no acknowledgement of the years they had spent together. That night, Evelyn finally asked the question she had avoided for so long. Her voice trembled, but she did not raise it. She asked whether Daniel was truly happy. He paused, surprised, as though the thought had never crossed his mind. I'm content, he replied after a moment. Isn't that enough? Evelyn realized then how differently they defined happiness. For Daniel, contentment meant stability without complication. For Evelyn, it meant connection, presence, and being chosen every day. The gap between those definitions felt unbridgeable. Days later, a small moment changed everything. Evelyn returned home earlier than expected and heard Daniel's voice from the living room, relaxed and amused. He was on a call, unaware of her presence. She did not intend to listen, but his words stopped her in place that he joked about marriage, about how some relationships existed only for appearances. His laughter was light, careless, and unfamiliar. When he spoke of Evelyn, it was with a tone that stripped away the dignity she had worked so hard to maintain. He did not sound angry. He sounded detached. Evelyn stepped back quietly, her heart steady in a way that surprised her. For the first time, clarity replaced confusion. She understood that the emptiness she felt was not accidental or temporary. It was chosen. That night, she lay awake beside Daniel, no longer waiting for something to change. The silence between them felt final, but not hopeless. As dawn approached, Evelyn made a decision she had feared for years. Whatever came next, she knew one thing with certainty. She could no longer remain invisible in her own life. After that night, I began to notice everything I had previously trained myself to overlook. It wasn't that Emily and Ryan changed their behavior dramatically. It was that I stopped editing reality to make it easier to accept. Patterns emerged where I once saw coincidence. Silences grew heavier. The house felt occupied by conversations I was no longer part of. Mornings became especially revealing. Emily woke earlier than she used to, moving through the kitchen with quiet purpose. Ryan often joined her, coffee mug in hand, their voices low and familiar. When I entered, the rhythm shifted. Topics changed. Smiles softened. I told myself this was courtesy, not secrecy, but the distinction grew thinner each day. Emily was different with me, not unkind, just distant in a way that suggested her emotional energy was being spent elsewhere. When I spoke, she listened politely rather than fully. When I asked how she was feeling, she answered with efficiency, not honesty. It felt as though I was speaking to someone who had already had the conversation I was trying to start, just not with me. Ryan, for his part, seemed torn between gratitude and guilt. He avoided prolonged eye contact with me, yet went out of his way to help around the house. He fixed a leaky faucet, mowed the lawn without being asked, thanked me repeatedly for letting him stay. His politeness felt rehearsed, like someone trying to prove they deserve their place. Point one afternoon, I came home earlier than expected. The car was still in the driveway, and the house was quiet except for voices coming from the living room. I paused again, not because I wanted to listen, but because my body seemed to understand something my mind was still resisting. Emily was speaking, her tone calm, but weighted with emotion. She talked about choices, about how people slowly drift into lives they never intended to live. Ryan responded quietly, telling her that she was the only person who seemed to understand him. There was no flirtation in his voice, only dependence. That somehow made it worse that I stepped into the room, and both of them looked up too quickly. Emily smiled first, the way people do when they want to reassure rather than connect. Ryan stood up immediately, offering to run an errand that didn't need to be done. I nodded, grateful for the space, but unsettled by how easily it was created. Later that evening, Emily and I sat across from each other at dinner. The silence between us felt deliberate. I considered asking her directly what was happening, but fear stopped me. Not fear of her answer, but fear of what the answer would require me to do. Confrontation felt like standing at the edge of something irreversible. Instead, I asked about her day. She answered, then asked about mine. The exchange was polite, symmetrical, and empty. Marriage, I realized, can survive many things, but indifference is not one of them. That night, Emily didn't come to bed until late again. This time, I stayed awake. When she entered the room, she hesitated, as if deciding whether honesty was worth the trouble. She chose quiet instead, slipping under the covers without a word. I turned toward her, wanting to bridge the gap, but the distance felt intentional, guarded. The following days blurred together. Ryan remained in the house, but his presence felt increasingly complicated. Emily continued to support him emotionally, offering advice, encouragement, and understanding. She was becoming the person he leaned on, the one he trusted most. I watched it happen with the strange detachment of someone witnessing a slow accident, unable to intervene without causing damage of another kind. That I spoke to Laura one afternoon, meeting her for coffee under the pretense of catching up. I didn't tell her everything. I didn't have the language for it yet. I only said that Emily felt far away and that something in my home felt unsettled. Laura listened carefully, reminding me that emotional distance doesn't appear overnight. It grows where communication stops. Her words stayed with me. That evening, I finally found the courage to speak. I asked Emily if she was happy. The question landed harder than I expected. She looked at me for a long moment, then said she didn't know. It wasn't an accusation, but it wasn't reassurance either. That answer told me what I needed to know. Whatever was happening between Emily and Ryan might not have crossed a visible line, but it had already crossed an emotional one. Trust, once stretched thin, does not return to its original shape. As I lay awake that night, I understood that silence was no longer an option and that the next conversation we had would change everything. Evelyn Carter did not confront the truth immediately. She carried it with her for days, testing its weight, hoping it would dissolve under logic. She watched Daniel closely, noticing how he avoided her eyes when Lena's name came up, how his phone never left his side. The man she had trusted with her life had begun to move like someone guarding a secret. Each quiet moment between them grew heavier, until silence itself felt like a confession. The confirmation arrived without drama. Evelyn found it in the most ordinary way, while folding laundry, while the television murmured in the background, while Daniel was in the shower. His phone vibrated on the bedside table. She had never checked his messages before. The choice felt less like suspicion and more like self-preservation. One glance was enough. The words were brief, unmistakable, and final. Lena's name glowed on the screen, followed by a sentence that stole the air from Evelyn's lungs. It spoke of fear, of consequences, of something irreversible growing inside her. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, the phone heavy in her hands. The room felt unfamiliar, as if the walls had shifted while she wasn't looking. When Daniel emerged, towel around his waist, he froze at the sight of her expression. He didn't ask what was wrong. He knew, "What is this?" Evelyn asked quietly, holding out the phone. Her voice did not shake. That frightened him more than anger would have. That Daniel's shoulders sagged. He sat beside her, rubbing his temples, searching for words that could soften what had none. "It wasn't planned," he said. "I never meant for it to happen like this." "Like what?" Evelyn asked. "With my best friend?" He flinched. The silence stretched, exposing the truth he no longer tried to deny. When he finally spoke, his voice was small. "Lena is pregnant." The sentence fell between them, final and unforgiving. Evelyn felt something inside her close. A door she hadn't known was still open. She waited for pain, for tears, for the collapse she had imagined. Instead, a calm settled over her. sharp and clear. "How long?" she asked. Daniel answered, each word another fracture. He spoke of loneliness, of mistakes made in moments of weakness, of confusion. He said he still loved Evelyn. He said it meant nothing. Every excuse sounded rehearsed, as if he had been preparing for this moment longer than she realized. Evelyn stood. The room tilted briefly before steadying. She walked to the living room and called Lena. Her hands did not tremble. When Lena arrived, breathless and pale, Evelyn saw the truth written across her face before a word was spoken. "I didn't know how to tell you," Lena whispered, tears filling her eyes. "I was scared." Evelyn looked at her, searching for the friend she had trusted for years. What she saw instead was someone she no longer recognized. "How long were you going to let me live in this lie?" she asked. Lena sobbed, apologizing, reaching out as if closeness could erase betrayal. Daniel tried to intervene, to explain again, but Evelyn raised a hand. The room fell silent. For the first time, she understood how completely alone she had been. Even while surrounded by familiar faces, she walked to the bedroom and returned with her wedding ring. The gold band caught the light, a symbol that had once meant safety. She held it for a moment, remembering the promises spoken with certainty, the future she had believed in without question. Then she slipped it off her finger and placed it on the table between them. "I won't fight for someone who chose to lose me," Evelyn said. That Daniel's composure broke. He pleaded, promised change, swore this mistake would never define him. Lena cried harder, murmuring apologies that came too late. Evelyn listened without reacting. Her decision had already been made. She packed a small bag, choosing only what she needed. At the door, she paused, taking one last look at the life she was leaving behind. Daniel stood frozen, the weight of his actions finally visible. Lena sat on the couch, hands over her face, alone in a way she had never expected. Evelyn stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind her. The sound echoed softly, marking the end of something she had once believed unbreakable. As she walked away, she felt grief rise at last, sharp and real, but beneath it was something stronger, a resolve she had never known she possessed. Outside, the night air was cool and steady. Evelyn breathed deeply, unsure of where she was going, only certain she could not stay. Behind her, Daniel's world was unraveling. Ahead of her lay uncertainty, pain, and the quiet promise that survival was possible. She walked forward without looking back, unaware that this departure would ignite a search driven by regret, obsession, and the desperate hope that some losses could still be undone. Daniel Carter did not understand the depth of what he had lost until the apartment grew quiet. The silence was not peaceful. It pressed against him, exposing every careless decision he had made. Evelyn's absence altered the space itself. Her mug was gone from the kitchen counter. Her shoes no longer waited by the door. Each missing detail reminded him that she had not stormed out in anger, but had left with intention. That he called her that night. The call went unanswered. He sent messages that began with apologies and ended with desperation. Hours passed without a reply. By morning, anxiety replaced denial. Daniel told himself she only needed time, that she would return once emotions cooled. Yet as the days stretched on, the certainty he relied on began to fracture. Lena called him repeatedly, her voice unsteady, her fear unmistakable. Daniel avoided her. The reality of her pregnancy, once an abstract problem he believed he could manage, now felt suffocating. When he finally answered, he spoke without warmth. I can't deal with this right now, he said, ending the call before she could respond. For the first time, Lena realized she was facing the consequences alone. Days turned into a restless blur. Daniel went to Evelyn's workplace, hoping she might still be there, clinging to routine. Her colleagues looked at him with polite confusion. She had taken leave, they said. No further details. He drove past places they had frequented together, cafes and parks heavy with memory. Each stop deepened his regret. He had taken her loyalty as permanence, never considering how easily trust, once broken, could disappear entirely. Margaret Carter confronted him after a week of silence. She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse. She simply asked, "Where is your wife?" The question carried more weight than anger ever could. Daniel confessed everything, his words tumbling out in shame. Margaret listened, her expression grave. "You didn't lose her when she left," she said. "You lost her when you decided your comfort mattered more than her dignity." Her words stayed with him, sharp and unavoidable. That night, Daniel dreamed of Evelyn standing just beyond his reach, her face calm, unrecognizing. He woke with the certainty that love did not vanish suddenly. It eroded, worn away by neglect and betrayal. Evelyn, meanwhile, had chosen invisibility. She stayed in a small rented room across town, one that held no memories. The days were quiet, measured. She avoided familiar streets and mutual friends, protecting herself from explanations she was not ready to give. At night, the pain surfaced, but she faced it alone, determined not to let it pull her back. Ryan Hale noticed her absence first. When Evelyn returned briefly to collect paperwork, he offered a simple nod of understanding. He did not ask questions. His restraint felt like respect, something she had not realized she missed. Their conversations remained professional, grounded, free of expectation. It was enough that Daniel's search grew frantic. He checked bank records, called distant relatives, even waited outside places he thought she might pass. Each failed attempt chipped away at his composure. The man who once controlled every aspect of his life now reacted to it, driven by fear rather than confidence. Lena attempted to reach Evelyn, leaving messages filled with remorse. None were answered. The friendship she had taken for granted had dissolved as completely as the marriage. Alone in her apartment, Lena confronted the truth she had avoided. Being chosen in secrecy was never the same as being chosen openly. One evening, Daniel sat alone in the darkened apartment, staring at the ring still resting on the table where Evelyn had left it. He realized then that searching for her was not about reconciliation alone. It was about absolution, about proving to himself that he was not the man his actions suggested. The possibility that Evelyn might never return terrified him more than any punishment. At last, through a chance conversation and quiet persistence, Daniel discovered where Evelyn was staying. The knowledge brought no relief, only dread. He drove to the address, but remained in his car, watching the building from across the street. He imagined her inside, living without him, learning how to breathe again. Daniel rested his head against the steering wheel, overwhelmed by the certainty that regret could not rewrite the past. Still, he waited, caught between the desire to see her and the fear that she had already moved beyond his reach. As the light in her window flickered on, he understood that the next step would define not only what he wanted, but what he deserved.